Hi, friend. Thank you so much for joining us for the second episode of the Live Well with Josie podcast. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of talking to our guest, Jordan Lee Dooley. Jordan is a two-time national best-selling author of Own Your Everyday and Embrace Your Almost, a podcast host, an entrepreneur, business course creator, and clean beauty educator and advocate. Today, we discuss topics about leaping with faith in career path changes, health obstacles like cystic acne and recurrent pregnancy loss, and how to create a safe space in your home by making intentional product swaps. If you're needing direction with your current career, are searching for community in your life, feeling a little lost in your health journey, want some tips on how to make intentional swaps to more non toxic ingredients in your home, this podcast is for you. You can find Jordan on Instagram at Jordan Lee Dooley, her website, jordanleedooley.com, where you can also snag a copy of her books, or listen to her podcast, She, on Apple Podcast or other streaming platforms. And don't forget to check the show notes for further resources from today's episode. Welcome to the Live Well with Josie podcast, a space for women like you to enter with an open mind and heart and leave feeling empowered to live your best life full of intention. Here, we learn together and we grow together. Enjoy today's episode. Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today on the Live Well with Josie podcast. We are so excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's fun to be here.
Jordan has had such an amazing journey in her career, in her life, and she has used every little obstacle to come to such an intentional space for women to be able to really focus on themselves spiritually and with their own journeys. So, Jordan, if you want to go ahead and just kind of give us a little background of who you are and how you even started your journey in your career, and then we'll kind of move forward from there and talk about all the things.
Absolutely. Well, it's a long story, so I will give you the Spark Notes version. It's funny. I started my career working in the online space kind of on accident at first. When I was a college student, I knew that at some point in my life, I would want to have flexibility. I wanted to be able to be married, have a family. Like that was something that was always kind of on my radar, although at the time I was only 20 and in no hurry. And so I was starting to look around at the job opportunities. I had studied healthcare management and policy, so more on the public policy side of the health field. And all of that said, I started to look at the opportunities kind of available to me, and just none of them felt like they were the right fit. And so as I was still kind of in that, you know, end of college, early grad season, I started just a small little side business. It was an Etsy store. I was doing a lot of hand lettering. It was kind of my creative outlet. And I did it initially just as a hobby, as a creative outlet. But then it started to grow. And I really enjoyed the creative side, the entrepreneurial side, the challenge of it. It just was something that I kind of got hooked into really quickly. And so, anyways, that kind of evolved into various other creative endeavors online. So I started blogging, which then led to self-publishing a few like short books, which led to speaking on college campuses to sorority women once I had graduated. And then it also looked like picking up a camera and trying wedding photography and just kind of like dabbling. And at the time, it actually ended up being the best fit because I had around that time gotten engaged to my now husband, who was playing professional football. He was in and out of the NFL. So our life was like really uncertain as to where we would end up, what city we were going to settle in, what that was going to look like. So entrepreneurship ended up making sense for me just with the nature of our life. And so it just kind of grew and evolved from there. I eventually came out with a sweatshirt line with a tagline that said, "Your brokenness is welcome here," which was really just meant to be a community building piece. And that took off, exploded across college campuses. So anyway, just did a lot of things in the first couple years of my career, and things grew really quickly. Between the time I started to 2 to 3 years in, I had a 7-figure company that I was just like trying to manage with a very small team. I was speaking across the country. I actually had an opportunity to publish with a traditional publishing house. And so it was like kind of, the way I describe it is within about 3 to 4 years, by the time I was about 25 years old, it seemed like all my dreams had kind of come true. Like I had a lot of success career-wise really early. And I kind of got used to this idea that like, if I want something, I just do all the right things and it'll work out. And so that was kind of my experience for the first several years of my career. That's kind of what my brain got used to experiencing. And in many ways that was true. And it was a huge blessing. Like I don't discount that. But the hard part about having that much success And that much, like, on paper, it just looked like this is the dream. I have the 7-figure company and the book deal and the house I just bought with my husband and, the followers online and like all the things we think will like complete us, right? And give us like the
Right.
dream life. And again, huge blessing. Like, so thankful that I started when I did. It's given me the flexible life that I have now and all of that. But it was interesting because life started to shift at 25. At that point, it was career stuff was going well. I was like full steam ahead, had a national best-selling book. Like things were just, felt like I was just like going down the list of checking off all the check boxes in life.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of that year, so it was 2019, I got pregnant for the first time. And this is where it started. This is like where my personal story and my professional story start to blend a little bit. So we can go into that more. But the long and short of it is, I thought, oh my gosh, this year is just like the best year ever. Like everything's going according to plan, like best-selling book, bought the house. Now I'm pregnant. Like what could be better, right? And then that pregnancy unexpectedly ended. And then I started on this journey that I didn't expect to be on of struggling with recurrent pregnancy loss. So that really made me take a hard look at the way that I was working, the things that I was pursuing, what I really valued, because I had kind of gotten caught up in just achieving the next thing because I could, because I kind of got, addicted to the high of the next accomplishment, the next opportunity, chasing the next thing. And when life really laid me flat on my back, it shifted my career path and my approach to work quite a bit. So we can get into all the details of that if you want. But it was just the long and short of it is now 3 years after that kind of disruption in my life that has really shifted a lot of the way that I live and work. I feel like I've learned, in my mid to or now late 20s, how to live a little bit more intentionally, how to do the work that aligns with what God has for me and not just achieve things for the sake of achieving them. So anyway, that's kind of what has like shaped my journey. And now, I mean, I still write books, but I also, do a lot more work in the wellness space and have a really big heart for helping women work well, and to live well because I don't say that I like blame myself. I don't think any of those things happened because I was like hustling my butt off, but because I had to have a major perspective shift. I'm like, wait, I'm not taking care of me. And what do I need to change here? So, anyway, that's kind of a quick recap of what led to what I do.
I think that's so important. On my first podcast, I had talked about how I grew so quickly my online community and I also like did all the things I wanted to do. I became a nutritional therapy practitioner, restorative wellness practitioner, an HTMA professional. I did all these things. I grew my online business. I started to work with clients and I'm like, okay, now what? And I feel like I should be happier now because I reached my goal, right? And so instead of chasing the destination, because are we ever actually going to be where we want to be? Enjoy the journey while you're along. And I just think that that's so important is like really fulfilling everything that you want to do, but also relying on, I need to listen to what God has in store for me and how I can use that in order to speak to other people and help other people in the way that I'm meant to. So, let's go back a little bit. I want to ask you when you were in college, you were going to school for health. And I'm sorry, what did you say exactly it was?
Yeah. So I've always been interested in the health field, but I've also
Mm.
always been very entrepreneurial minded. So in my brain, I
Right.
was like, okay, so I need to do something that's both. And so I did healthcare administration or healthcare management and policy, which is like the business side of healthcare and the public policy side of health.
Got you. And so you started out with that, and then you completely switched and you started doing
Etsy and photography.
to Etsy and photography. And I think that's amazing though, because you talk a lot about being multi-passionate. And I'm very multi-passionate. I know a lot of people that I come in contact with daily is they're multi-passionate. And I think it's probably because we gravitate towards people like that when we are that way. But I think that's so amazing that you just completely shifted and you weren't really, I mean, it didn't seem like you were afraid, but when you completely shifted your entire life to do something different than what you were actually going to school for, how did that make you feel? And what allowed you to allow yourself to be able to make that shift?
Yeah, I think part of it was that I didn't think it was permanent. Like it was more like
Mhm.
this is just what works right now. Like I'll come back to my career field. It's temporary. And then it just didn't end up being temporary. So I think
Mhm.
that was part of it. It's just like not, I think sometimes we freak ourselves out before doing anything because we think like if I take a step, I'm like putting it in concrete and it's stuck like that forever. And the reality
Mhm.
is like I was just trying stuff to see what would work for my lifestyle and my husband and I, or soon to be husband and I's needs at that point. And I
Right.
think the other big thing was something my mom told me. It was actually a piece of advice, and this was right around the time that I was graduating and just really unsure that I wanted to even use my degree at that time. And it's kind of
Mhm.
ironic because now in my career, I'm like, in some ways, I do kind of use that degree now. It's kind of come
Yeah.
full circle, but we can get to that. But at the time, I was just like, I don't want to go work in a nursing home. Like, I don't
Mhm.
really want to work in insurance. Like, this is just not feeling like the right fit for me. And I remember my mom, I told her that and I thought she would be disappointed because it's like, I just went to 4 years of school. Like, we just put all this time and energy and money and stuff into that. And she actually said to me, she goes, okay, so don't like just try some stuff. And I had already
Mhm.
kind of been dabbling, but that was kind of the permission slip I needed, to hear from my mom, who, kind of had an unconventional career path herself, but still had a lot of success. And she
Mhm.
basically just told me, like, you're not going to know what you want to do unless you try. Like, clarity comes from action. So start trying stuff. And some things you try aren't going to go well. You're going to hate it. Other things you try, are going to go really great. So, anyway, that was like a huge, I think just freeing piece of advice that I was given, and that definitely was the thing I needed to hear to get over any of my own roadblocks of like, I'm gonna let my family down, or this is gonna be a bad idea, or any of those lies we could tell ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I had a very similar situation where I taught for 5 years. I went to school for 4 years to teach, moved to South Carolina from Ohio, and I taught for 5 years, and then the biggest thing holding me back was that I felt like I was gonna let my parents down because of that, and it was like, "This is exactly what I wanna do, and I'm gonna be helping people, and I'm trying to convince them," and they're like, "Okay, okay, that's like, it's okay, it's fine," but I think I was convincing myself more than I was. I needed that permission, like you said, that permission slip to go ahead and do it, and I think it's such a scary thing for women to do is completely switch what they thought that they were going to do, or they had this path that they were going down and they completely shifted, and it's a very scary thing. Change is scary, but it can also be the best thing that you do for your life. And maybe like you said, it might not be a forever thing. You might go back to something in later on, just kind of like you're using what what you originally went to school for, kind of in a sense with what you're doing now. But I think it's important for us to be able to give ourselves that permission to do scary things and to take those risks if we know that it's something that we're supposed to be doing. If we feel a draw to it, it's God speaking to us being like, this might be for you. So let's take that leap of faith and go for it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you completely shifted and then you used that to help women, and kind of give us a little synopsis of what Soul Scripts was and how you used that in order to intentionally speak to women and get them into community with each other.
Yeah. So Soul Scripts was the name of my original Etsy shop. And then we ended up creating, or I was, blogging kind of alongside of that. And I said this statement where I was talking a lot about community and sisterhood because I was going and speaking on college campuses to a lot of sororities and women's groups and things like that. So anyways, I was talking about like when you go through hard times, I like wrote this social media post and I happened to say this phrase, like your brokenness is welcome here. And the idea was like, come as you are, you know, like we're here for you kind of thing. And it was interesting because at the time I still had the shop, but I was also speaking and blogging. And it was kind of just this, it had kind of become this like conglomeration of things.
Mhm.
So it was kind of interesting because then we got a ton of emails from people asking, do you have this on a shirt? Do you have this on a pillow? Do you have this on anything? And we were like, no, but we could give you that. So we did like a short run of sweatshirts. We did crew necks, sold out in like an hour. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, this is like a thing people are connecting to. So we did a bigger print run, again, sold out in just a couple hours. And so that kind of shifted the direction of Soul Scripts to being very community based and kind of around this message of your brokenness is welcome here. And so that grew really quickly, kind of similar, like just snowball effect. And sometimes when things go really quickly, that's awesome. But at the same time, it can be hard to know, like, okay, well, where am I steering this ship? And so what kind of happened was a few years in, it had grown so quickly, which was a huge blessing in so many ways. But I started to notice there was a lot of confusion around the message. Like some people were taking it to mean like, well, I can just be a mess. And like, that's what it is. Like there was a lack of intention. Whereas the original heart behind it was meant to be like, one of the ways you move forward and you heal and you get through hard things is through community, is with community and support. That's not like a ticket to just sit in your struggle. In fact,
Mhm.
opening up about it and like welcoming others in and allowing others to welcome you in is really a way to move through it and to move forward. But there was,
Mhm.
I think, some miscommunication of like, my misbehavior is welcome here. My meanness is welcome here. Like we had some community groups that we created for that community. And we had a lot of issues with drama and people not being very nice to each other. And I'm like, wait, this was not what it was intentionally meant to be. So we kind of pulled back from that for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
I had to reevaluate, like, where are we going with this? How do we clarify the purpose of it? And how do we make sure that this is a healthy message, right? Because it can get
Mm-hmm.
misconstrued really quickly. So I actually took a step back and we closed the doors to the shop, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever reopen them, but I just knew, like, I need to figure this out. So that was in 2019. And then a couple months later is when my journey with recurrent loss started. And so it was over that year where I had a couple losses back to back. And I noticed that quite a few family and friends would say things to me. They'd be like, especially after my second loss, because I was pretty far along at that point, they would say things like, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. Or there are no words. I'm so sorry. And through receiving that and being on the receiving end, and for the first time really walking through my own like deep valley of suffering, like I had been through a breakup or two, and like that's hard, but like comparatively to losing a child, it's like such a different experience, right? And so for the first time in my life, like I was like, oh my gosh, like, and my community actually started reaching out and telling me my brokenness was welcome. And that was like a really interesting, like being on the receiving end of a phrase I came up with was like, and it struck me like, these are the words we can say when we don't know what to say. Like
Right.
it's to communicate, like, I'm here with you. I'm here for you. So we ended up bringing the shop back in 2020, especially through like all the COVID stuff. And so many people had lost so much. And it just like ended up being such a powerful thing. And we had a whole new clear mission statement of, we give you the words when you have none. So the idea is like, send this to a friend or wear it yourself when you just feel like words aren't sufficing. So anyways, it kind of, is interesting how through adversity, clarity can come. And that's kind of what happened for SoulScript specifically, but also just my career as a whole. That's a small sector of what I do. We only open the shop once or twice a year. But anyway, so that was kind of the heart behind it and kind of how it evolved and even closed and came back with a little bit of a clearer new mission and all of that. So yeah, it's a long story.
Yeah, no, and that's great. I think it's so important. I think there are a lot of people who have been in there are, not I think. There are a lot of women who have been in similar situations as you, and just that, oftentimes it's hard for anybody to talk about their feelings. And I was just talking to somebody yesterday and it really hit home, and I was so happy I was having this podcast interview conversation with you today, because I was talking to somebody yesterday who's going through a similar situation. And she was just like, I've been acting like I'm okay, but I'm not.
Mhm.
And so let's we'll kind of transition into that conversation. Um, so if you would just kind of give as much as you feel comfortable, just give a little bit of background of what you've experienced the last couple years with your journey in conceiving, what that has brought to you physically, emotionally, and what you feel like your message has been that you've received throughout this entire journey.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like what's interesting about recurrent loss is sometimes it's hard to know who to turn to for help, because
Mhm,
typically it's not necessarily a fertility issue, right? Like
mhm,
I've always gotten pregnant pretty quickly for the most part. Um, but it's okay, well, why isn't this sticking issue? So it took me several years, honestly. I feel like I just recently, after 3 years of digging, finally found a missing link. And so, and I don't even necessarily know 100% if that is the missing link, but compared to everything else I found, I'm like, this is not an easy thing to navigate and answers on.
mhm,
But again, it's, similar to whenever, if there's something in life that you keep feeling like, the way I describe it is like, you start walking down a journey and then it keeps getting cut short and you keep getting sent back to the finish line, whatever that may be. So that's my specific experience with that. I wrote a whole book about this feeling, not necessarily about miscarriage, but just about like this idea of being almost where you thought you'd be, like everything looks like it's working out, and then just having the rug ripped out from under you over and
mhm,
over, right? And it can just feel really disheartening. And I think in my personal experience though with that, it definitely has shaken a sense of femininity, a sense of womanhood. Like when you feel like in one way or another, and maybe this is through miscarriage, maybe this is through fertility challenges, maybe this is through chronic illness, whatever it may be. I think what that can create, especially for us in women, is a sense of my body is failing me and I feel less woman. And I think that's a huge thing I've had to work through. And I don't necessarily know that I've like arrived at this place of like, I'm good now. But I think there is that feeling that can come up when you're like, I'm young, relatively healthy overall. Like, why is my body failing me and my family and my future, right? In one way
mhm,
or another. And I think regardless of what the health challenge may be, like it can feel that way. And mine manifested in the biggest way through pregnancy loss, but it also manifested in other ways that made me feel insecure, like chronic cystic acne and a few other things that just really discouraged me because I'm like, hello, I'm like 26, 27 years old. This should not be happening to me. Right.
Mhm.
So, um, anyway, I think that was, this feeling that your friend mentioned of like, I've been acting like I'm okay, but I'm not. It's really real because even when, you've learned to move forward and you learn to keep going, when you are dealing with something that's kind of a chronic challenge that you are getting some answers to, but not full resolution, and it's kind of this up and down process, it really can make you feel incredibly insecure, first of all. Second of all, like kind of a stranger in your own body. I think that's what
Mhm.
any kind of health issues can make you feel like. Um, and it also can create this like sense of, do I even count? Like, am I even still like a woman, in the way that, because it sometimes feels like the most basic things my body should be able to do, like have a normal cycle or bear a child or, the things that it was like designed to do. When it
Right.
stops doing that the right way, suddenly you're like, well, now I'm really struggling with it kind of is like an identity crisis, I guess is
Right.
ultimately the way I would describe it. So that's kind of what I've had to navigate. And I think a lot of women with through various health issues have to navigate that, feeling kind of like a
Mhm.
stranger in their body, not feeling like they can trust their body, and also feeling kind of like an identity crisis of like, well, who am I if this doesn't work, or who am I outside of this? And so, yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell, I would say my like analysis. But yeah.
And I think that's something that, like you said, a lot of people can relate to, whether it's chronic illness or anything like that, because I know just myself dealing with chronic illness for 11 years, 12 years now, and just having to go through that PCOS and lupus and just really connecting with other women who have gone through similar situations. It's a very defeating feeling. And like you said, sometimes you feel like a stranger in your own body, and that's really scary and really like just this completely helpless feeling that we have sometimes. And I think that something that you did was you took control of a situation in a way that you could take control with learning and educating yourself. And like you said, it's nobody's fault. It's not your own fault that anything happens to you or that you're going through anything. And that's one of the biggest things that I tell people a lot who, especially clients I work with PCOS or lupus or anything like that, gut issues, what have you, is that it's not your fault, especially because it's funny because I was just telling somebody this other day too. We're taught so many things in school, but when am I going to use the Pythagorean theorem? Why didn't anybody teach me how to track my cycle or something like that? We really talk about all these things that, yeah, it might be important in some jobs that you have, but like what about my life? Like we should be learning some of these things that are really going to help us just thrive as human beings, but we don't learn this stuff. Like you learn the food pyramid, you learn all this other stuff, but you don't actually learn how to eat for your body, how to eat foods that aren't filled with all these pesticides and all these things. I think it's important for everybody to really get that message is that it's not your fault. No matter what you're going through, it's not your fault. And then there's always a chance that, we can support our bodies and we can do the best that we can. But is that going to mean that things are going to be perfect? Probably not. But it means that you're trying to support your body in the way that your body needs supported. But regardless, it is not your fault. So, okay, let's go ahead and talk about your journey with cystic acne for a second. So, what's your journey with that? I know you said it just kind of made you feel like a stranger in your body as well. How did you use that to intentionally pivot and create this path of learning and education for yourself?
Well, I started to notice kind of a chronic struggle with acne in my early 20s, probably around the age of 22, 23, shortly after I got married, actually. And at first, I was like, this is just annoying, but I'd cover it with makeup and move on. And thought maybe it was just a flare up and it'd go away. But after some time went on and it just continued, I was like, okay, this is not normal. Like something's wrong. But I was so busy again, and like those first few years up until, when really kind of, I feel like sometimes there's health issues that can make you feel insecure, but they're not necessarily so disruptive to your life that they stop you in your tracks. So like for me, now looking back, I'm like, oh, the acne thing was probably somewhat of a red flag. It ended up not being the whole picture. Like I think a lot of people want to simplify things like pregnancy loss. Like these things really tied together for me. Like they want to be like, oh, well, like it must be your egg quality or like your hormones. And that's absolutely true. My stuff ended up being like genetic stuff that I have to change with like blood thinners. Like no amount of like healing my hormones was going to fix that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there was helpfulness in that to a degree, but I think the biggest thing was it was a red flag that something was imbalanced in my body, period, whether or not that would have affected pregnancy. And in some ways, I kind of ignored it because I didn't really want to have to do the work to fix it. And I also didn't know what the work would be. Like, I was like, well, I eat salads and I work out. So, like, I don't understand why this is happening, And I didn't really understand how hormones worked. I didn't understand what my body really needed. I understood health to be going to the gym, eating salads, trying not to eat burgers and fries too much. Like, that was my understanding of health, which is a lot more like fitness and diet culture than it is like
Right.
hormonal support.
Yep.
Which I now understand. But at the time I was like, well, very healthy and young. So I don't know.
Most of us our age, like millennials, that's what our mindset goes to.
Yeah. Then it was like once I had a couple of miscarriages back to back, I was like starting in my brain. And as I started working with some like more naturally minded providers, it was when I drew the link of like, maybe there is some sort of like, there's something going on in my body because my body's like flat out rejecting me at this point between my skin and my pregnancies and all of that. So that was when I really went on like the deep dive into what's going on with my hormones, what's going on with all the things, my gut, everything, and found quite a bit. I had pretty severe adrenal fatigue, which made sense going back to what I said earlier in the beginning about just like how much of hustle train I was on for career stuff the first few years.
Yeah.
Pretty severe adrenal fatigue, thyroid was kind of tapped, had a lot of gut imbalance, like things like that. So started working on learning how to heal that. I think something that's not talked about a lot is like you can find some of these root answers, and I found some of them. I also kind of got some maybe mediocre health advice that was just like cut out all this stuff, and I just cut out a bunch of triggers without actually healing the root. So it was interesting because I thought I healed it. I was like, oh, it's been better. I'm not drinking milk. Like it must be good.
Right.
And then as I dug more and more, and then it like kind of came back, and I was like, wait, I thought we took care of this. And so I had to kind of like do these different layers. And the way I describe it is like my health journey has been like peeling back one layer, learning some things, finding from that like what worked, and first and what of it isn't actually very like sound health advice, and then digging through another layer and another layer. So that's where I say it really is a journey, and I'm glad you call it that, because I think sometimes we think like if I just work with one functional doctor and they do my labs and they tell me what's wrong, like I'm going to fix my diet in this way and tomorrow and like it'll start changing. And it's like, no, it actually might be like a series of peeling back one layer of the onion at a time and tackling what you find, but then that might bring up another clue or bring up something else. I know what it was like for me. So really, it's been like a 3-year journey to heal my skin too. And I would say my skin is like 80 to 85% better, 85 probably. It's not perfect, but I'm also at that point where I'm like, I've accepted the fact that I might get a blemish a couple times a month. What I can't deal with is like when the whole face is just like chronically breaking out, So I've kind of, had to navigate like, man, I think sometimes we just think that the first, potential answer we find is the solution, when in reality, our bodies are really complex. And so I've had to give myself a lot of grace through the acne thing and the discovering what's going on with pregnancy stuff and thyroid stuff and all of the various things. Like once I started looking into pregnancy loss, it led to a lot of answers on acne stuff and then a lot of answers on thyroid stuff. And, and it just kind of like unfolded a lot more than I expected to find. So all of that said, it's been a journey to heal my skin. I've really, one big thing that I changed, and you and I talk about this, was shifting from conventional skincare and makeup to a cleaner option, and really just overhauling my entire lifestyle to reduce toxins. So if you want to touch on that, we can. But that was a huge piece that I think was helpful. I wouldn't say it was like the solution. I don't think there's a one size fits all, like, oh, just stop eating this and your acne will go away, or just use this skincare and your acne will go away. It's been a multifaceted approach, but I've kind of found the core things that I have found to be the most transformative and make the biggest difference. And those are the things I love to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you say that too, because when I talk to any of my clients or even just my online community, I always say your health journey is not linear. Healing is not linear, and it's a lifelong journey. And no matter what we do, like everything, like switching to cleaner beauty products, that's not the root cause, but that's definitely, if you're not using cleaner beauty products, if you're using beauty products that have a ton of synthetics and stuff, that's contributing. And so is everything else that you're using in your home, poor air quality, different toxins we're exposed to daily, all the foods that we're eating, inflammatory oils, all of these things. And so it's like everything can be contributing. Plus, you can have leaky gut because of all the things that you're going through. You need to heal your gut, but that's not just an easy thing like getting rid of dairy. And that's what a lot of people don't realize too is, oh, okay, I need to eliminate gluten and dairy, but then they just eliminate it and they don't have a healing protocol set into place that's actually doing the healing work while they're eliminating these foods that are triggers for them. And it's like, well, even though some people might need to stay away from like certain things for most of their lives. Like, that's not what is causing it. It's all these other things that are causing it. And I think that's super important for people to realize because, like you're saying, well, I used to think salads and working out, I was healthy because that's what we have been taught for so long with the fitness and diet culture. Is like, you can eat all the things, you can, after your workout, go ahead and eat a whole bag of Skittles that will help bulk up your muscles and stuff. It's like, what is this world? Like, what are these people
Like,
teaching you?
have you thought about how that's affecting your adrenals and your blood sugar and like everything else? And that's the part I think that can be hard. It's like most people don't have the time to really understand their whole bodies, right? But it is helpful to take the time to dig into how do things affect my system though?
Mhm.
Because that is like, I don't know. I just think that's like the crucial part because then you can make more educated decisions. You don't have to be a health guru, but understanding like, oh, some of these things that I'm eating aren't actually food. They're sold
Right.
as food. They're sold as a consumable, but they're not
Mhm.
actually food. I mean, I even got into the really restrictive, especially when I was first at the beginning of this healing journey. First thing I did was like live only a Whole30 lifestyle, even
Mhm.
more restrictive than that. It was like soy free, dairy free, gluten free, grain free, like everything free. And then I found that I was eating a lot of like processed stuff without realizing it because it's so
Right.
gluten free on it or whatever. But I'm consuming countless like cups of oat milk full of canola oil every day thinking I was being healthy. And then it's like, oh,
Right.
weird. Wonder why things aren't changing. And so
Yeah.
it wasn't until I really had to start learning, like, okay, severe restriction isn't necessarily the answer. Perhaps pulling back on some of the things that can be triggers, like conventional dairy or some of those things, can be helpful to kind of reset and, reset my system and get a fresh starting point and also clarify what are the triggers. Like it's supposed to be educational. I didn't
Mhm.
understand that when I first started working with my first provider. So to me, I was like, oh, we just have to cut out all these bad things. And in place of those things, we actually put in less nutritional things. It was weird. And
Mhm.
I was like, so I'm eating a ton of grains, a ton of nut milks, and like, I'm not feeling any better. What's going on? Anyway, I was really, and then it was interesting because then once I started doing more and more testing, as I was like, at first I was like, oh, wow, I'm so healthy. I feel so great. And then
Mhm.
it kind of, it didn't last. And then I did more testing and found like I was super deficient in core nutrients, like count
Mhm.
certain things like that. And I was like, okay, so maybe like cutting out all forms of dairy is a terrible idea. So I have a dairy allergy would be one thing, like if I had a severe lactose allergy or something,
Yeah.
just doing it because I thought that's what was healthy. And that's where it's like you really have to sift through some of the information and you do your best with what you can. Like at the time I thought I was doing great and I'm
Right.
probably not doing it right now. Like there's still going to be growth and things I learned, but I've definitely come a long way in the past few years. And I think that's what we as women have to remind ourselves is like, you're never going to get it perfect. You're never going to
Mhm.
do it 100%. The idea though is just like, be a constant student. Don't like keep your mind open, understand, like learn what you can and be aware and educate yourself so that you can make the most educated decisions for your body and for your health.
Yeah, that's extremely important, and I think especially when you're in a situation too where you're just wanting to heal, you're gonna do anything to heal. And so when you first started working with that provider, it was like, I'm gonna listen to everything they say. I'm gonna do all the things because I just want to feel better. But sometimes that can be more harmful than good. And I always tell my clients, like, low and slow, implement one thing at a time. Like, even if I'm giving you a bunch of information, like, this is the small part of all this information that you actually need to be focusing on. Because when we do so much at once, our body's under so much stress. And that is what is worse for our body, is putting our body under so much stress. Even though we're implementing all these things that are quote unquote good for us, it can just be stressing our bodies out more, stressing out our adrenals more, and in turn, just wreaking havoc on our
Yes.
hormones, creating this whole cycle. So, okay, I think this is perfect time to kind of get into, you used this to really switch your lifestyle from just the ingredients that you were putting in and on your body. And so I kind of want to have a little conversation about some of those ingredients that you've switched, or just some products that you've switched, why you've switched, and what you found during your time researching those ingredients.
Yeah. So in addition to, trying to navigate what does it look like to make diet changes that are really going to support my overall hormones and health and thyroid and everything. Something else I started digging into was just the environmental factors, like you mentioned earlier, water quality, products, things like that, foods that you're exposed to in terms of pesticides and herbicides and all of that. Um, and it was interesting some of the things I learned. Like, for example, I learned conventional coffee is one of the most heavily treated like crops in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like living in coffee shops for years in my 20s. I'm like, that explains the adrenal fatigue, like, and so many issues probably. Again, there's not a single like, this is why I had this, but it was a factor
Right.
that just compounded. And when your toxin load is so high, your body starts to experience breakdown, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that was like one thing that I learned that kind of caused me to shift my lifestyle and pay closer attention. And I'm not demonizing coffee. I just had to find how to source things better.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I really dug into was health, like personal care and beauty products, because I really found it fascinating. So I started researching this and I learned, so I'm going to just read this off so I say it correctly. But basically, in the US, Congress created a law that governs the safety of beauty and personal care products, which sounds great, right? It's called the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic. This was created in 1938. Okay, a long time ago, almost 100 years ago at this point. So then here's the thing. Under the FDMC Act from 1938 to 2016, so 6 years ago, the FDA banned only 11 ingredients for use in personal care products and cosmetic products. So there's like, yeah, that sounds great that they did this thing, but they only banned 11 ingredients. And then it's hardly been updated since. I think they added 19 more ingredients since 2016, but none of them were even that relevant because those are ingredients that were used in antibacterial soap, not things like makeup and shampoo and skincare and things like that. And then the other thing that's really kind of was eye-opening, and it was just really devastating for me to start reading, like, not only the lack of regulation, which honestly I'm not even that surprised about, but just the effects that things can have. But all of that said, this FD&C Act that exists, not only that, but the FDA or the FD&C Act, neither of them can actually require cosmetic products or ingredients to be tested before they're put on a shelf. So it hit me like, oh, all these things that we think are safe because they're being sold on the shelf, like, could actually all have really toxic and damaging ingredients in them. Right. So all of that said, and then the FDA actually doesn't have the authority to recall a product if it's causing issues. So all of this is happening, right? And I'm like reading about this going, okay, what the heck? And then in the meantime, while this is all going on, knowing, like, I was reading statistics, the average American woman puts over 168 chemicals on her body each day.
Wow, each day.
Yeah. And many of those, like, as I started reading, I'm like, a lot of these are linked to things like cancer, infertility, miscarriage, poor infant and maternal health outcomes, obesity, asthma, sensitivity, like skin sensitivity, like allergic reactions, and so many other health concerns. And I was like, this is a huge problem. And then I started looking at all of my personal care products and the things I was using. And I'm like, I believe there's 168 in just one, bottle of shampoo. I see like 30 to 60 like ingredients, and I bet at least a handful of them are, unhealthy. So that kind of led me down this rabbit hole to better understanding what I was putting on and in my body every day. So from the food standpoint, obviously, but I started to kind of shift my products, and it took me a while to find like what are truly reliable brands, what's really safe. But I found like trying to avoid red flag ingredients. I mean, there's a lot of them, but like some that immediately come to mind would be things like the ones that we might hear about that are a little bit more, how do I say, like parabens, for example. That like those are things that a lot of companies would be like, we're paraben free. That doesn't mean they're clean. It just means they're not using parabens, which is one of like 30 red flag ingredients. So anything from that to talc to, heavy metals, like various different things that can, even if they're in small quantities in the actual product, when you're using products that have that day after day after day, and it's getting into your skin, it's getting absorbed by your skin into your body, that starts to really increase what's called your toxin load or your toxin burden in your body. And so as I learned more and more about that, I was like, oh, this explains probably a lot. Like, this is just another one of those factors. And so I started to slowly shift my personal care products. I shifted things like makeup to a clean brand. I had a lot of trial and error with that. I feel like it's hard to find good, clean makeup.
Same here, girlfriend.
But I finally found one. I was like, okay, I have to tell the world about this because it's hard to find. Like, I think the hard part, and I think this is where a lot of people struggle, the struggle of switching to stuff that's more like clean and natural is the challenge is a lot of times it doesn't work very well, whether that's shampoo or makeup or whatever. Like, we want the stuff that works. And so it can be hard to make that switch if it doesn't perform very well. And so something I try to encourage people into that I've had to learn is like, I thought in order to use it for it to be safe, it all had to be made from like rocks from the earth. Like, and the reality is like, it's not that all synthetic is bad. Like, synthetic doesn't automatically equal toxic, right? There's just, you have to understand the ingredients and what actually is unsafe and not processable, like healthy for your body. So like natural doesn't automatically mean there's a lot of natural resources that like are not good to be consuming too much of, right?
Right.
Similarly, like, so it's just, I had to kind of learn how to navigate what clean actually means. And there's a lot of like opinion on that. But ultimately, the idea was like, okay, if I can be sure to eliminate kind of these top red flag ingredients, and if you want, Josie, I can actually give you a link to a free cheat sheet that I have. It's a link,
Yeah.
and that lists just like the top 20 ingredients that's helpful to look for on a label, basically, and how they
Mm-hmm.
might be listed.
Yeah.
Doesn't cover like all of them, but it covers the top 20 that I would say, like, if you see this, consider that a red flag and probably stay away from it, whether that's ethoxylated ingredients or
Yep.
fragrance or parabens or those kind of things. And how they might appear like in a sneaky way on the label so you learn to identify them. So I'll make sure to give you that link if you want to share it with this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Because that can be so hard to navigate. Like, what's clean?
Yeah.
And a lot of companies, this is another thing I learned, will promote themselves as natural or plant-based or organic or clean. So, and clean is not a regulated word. So it really needs to be toxin free, like
Mm-hmm.
more accurate. But anyway, like that's called greenwashing. A lot of companies know that consumers are starting to care about this more. So you have to kind of be at least a little bit educated. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to become a chemist overnight. But having like a basic list of like, these are things I need to watch for, because if the front of the label says it's natural, it's plant-based, it's this, that, and the other thing, but then I turn it around and it has this, 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 and this in it, like they're trying to fool me kind of. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, that's kind of the spiel on all that. But I'm very passionate about that because I feel like women have been tricked and deceived and really just not educated on this. You know, whether it was an
Yeah.
intentional deception or not, it's like, how has this not been clearly disclosed, and why are we just now learning about it as we're all, you know, in our late 20s and 30s and struggling with health issues? Like, this is not.
Well, and that makes me think of the greenwashing, makes me think of the pink washing too. So like for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, they're slapping the color pink on everything, but they're slapping pink on these products that are leading to or could lead to.
Full of ingredients are linked to potentially having a link to things like breast cancer. And
Exactly. And it's just sad and it's devastating, like you said, like, they're the FDA and they can't even do as much as we think that they can do when it comes to all this, and
yeah, that's the crazy thing. So not to interrupt you, but FDA can't just like, if let's say there's a company, like, did you hear about the whole thing where people were having like scalp burns and issues with their hair?
no.
Yeah. So that was like one of the products that people have complained about, right?
Mhm.
All of that said, like, the FDA can't just come in and be like, hey, we got to like recall this product because it's causing so many health issues or like acute problems for people. Like, the other thing that's hard is like acute problems would be like, I put shampoo in my hair and the next day I've got scalp burns or my hair is falling out or I'm itching or whatever. But a lot of the health issues that we have are not like acute. They're more like slowly built over time and they're chronic. But
Mhm.
let's say something really obvious like that happens. The
Mhm.
FDA cannot just come in and say, hey, this product isn't safe, we're going to recall it. The most they can do is send like a nice letter to the company, basically be like, hey, so like, you know, we've been seeing there's some complaints about this. Like, that's literally what they can do. It's not like there's
Wow.
like a law to where they can say, hey, this is clearly causing harm, we need to recall it. So at least that's as it is now. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many ingredients in cosmetic and personal care products. There's over 10,000 that are used in most women's personal care and cosmetic products. So the fact that like, you know, it's really only I think there's only been like 13% of them that have actually been reviewed. And the fact that the FDA really can't do anything, like if a product isn't safe or doesn't do much, like, again, I don't necessarily like put my whole trust in the FDA, but just be aware, like, you have to, as a consumer, be the one that is kind of regulating what comes in and out of your house and what you're able to use. And that's where, like, I wish there were more systems in place, but the reality is, like, you have to be your own advocate and you have to be at least educated in the basic information so that you can
Yep.
make better decisions, and not perfect decisions, but just at least one better decision at a time.
Absolutely. And I think that you and I kind of are similar in the sense that that's why we share these products with our communities, because we've been in that space where we have had to do all the guessing, all the research, all the education ourselves, and we understand how frustrating and how time consuming that can be. So the products that we use, with us being very cautious of what we put in and on our bodies, and our skin is our biggest organ, and so whatever we put on it seeps right into us and goes right into our bloodstream. So it's whatever we're putting on or in our bodies that we want to be able to share that with our communities, because we know that at least if it's not 100%, it's one of the best non-toxic companies that we've been able to find that we've done research on. And again, like you said, the performance, obviously with two people or anybody who like their makeup to look nice, if we're going to use makeup or if we're using ingredients, like performance does matter in a sense. Um
That's the reality. You can have your drawer all day long, but if you're not going to use it, that's part of the problem. And so, yeah, 100%.
yeah, I think that's so important. And I really appreciate you giving us all this education, this knowledge, and just the fact that you've had these obstacles that you've had to navigate personally, and you've used those to really intentionally change your lifestyle. And again, not being perfect, but just being able to switch some things that you know is going to make you feel better in the long run, both physically and mentally, is so important. A lot of women I know, especially that I've worked with or I've talked to, they struggle with thinking they have to do everything all at once. And like we said earlier, you do it low and slow. You do not have to do everything all at once. Start switching your hand soaps in your house, and then switch your foundation to crunchy because it's the best.
Yes. That's honest, but it is. And that's the thing, like, I think it's important to remember too, like the goal isn't perfection. If you want to eat organic, grass-fed regenerative meat all the time, like you're not going to go out with your friends ever. So
Mhm.
it's also like lifestyle. So because there was a point
Right.
where I was just like, if it's not, organic, or they use canola oil, like I can't touch it, and it's real. And you may go through ebbs and flows like that, trying to find what balance looks like for you. But again, the goal isn't perfection. Like I, had to pick my splurge. I cleaned all my beauty products and my personal care products and all of that up.
Mhm.
But a couple times throughout the year, I still go get my nails done because I like to. I have cleaned up my toxin load so much that small amount of exposure my body can handle. Like I always say, think of it like a bucket, right? Or like a bath
Mm.
with a tiny little in the bottom. That's like your detox pathway. So if you fill the tub slowly, it's going to be able to, and not overflow it. It's going to be able to drain that out. It'll be fine. But when you just like pour and dump gallons of water, it's going to start to overflow over the brim because it can't all go out that small hole at the bottom big
Right.
enough. And so that's where the toxin overload happens in our body. So if you can reduce your toxin load, like don't be afraid of toxins, because the reality is you're going to walk outside and you're going to breathe something in. Like we'll never, ever completely reduce toxins from our life. That's not the
Right.
goal. Like our bodies can detox to a certain degree. It's that we need to be aware that the reality is between the foods and the air and the products and all the things that we are exposed to, the plastics, everything, like all of that increases our toxic load to the point where it starts to overflow into our bodies and our bodies can't detox fast enough. So when you
Mhm.
can make the cognizant decision to change one thing at a time and slowly just reduce that toxin burden, it's not going to be perfect. You might still go get your nails done sometimes, or you might still use the shampoo that's kind of okay. But if you've cleaned up everything else, like your body's going to thank you for that and it will be able to detox better. So I think just keep in mind, like the goal is not perfection. It's just to make one better decision at a time.
Exactly. And I think it's funny because sometimes I'll put something on my Instagram story and I get a comment like, "Oh my gosh, you did that?" Or like, "You went to the Mexican restaurant?" I'm like, "Absolutely, I went to the Mexican
Yeah.
restaurant. Did I take some vitamin E before I went? Maybe, but I'm gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna go enjoy myself and I'm gonna go to barbecue with friends and I'm gonna do this." But what I tell my clients or anybody is your home should be your safe space.
Mhm.
And if your home can be your safe space, and again, filtering things out slowly but surely, filtering things out, making sure that what you're cleaning your house with, all of your household products and your makeup and different things like that can be maybe filtered out over time, doing a little pantry clean out, different things like that, like keeping your house your safe space. But if you want to have some Oreos in there for every once in a while treat, then go for it. But just making sure that your home is your safe space. So when you want to go enjoy yourself, you can and you don't have to think too much about it. But if you're really trying to detox your body or get rid of all these toxins that you've been exposed to for so long, like your laundry detergent and all these things, do it low and slow. Don't hyperfixate it because hyperfixating can cause a lot more emotional distress, which leads to dysfunction in the body. But doing it low and slow and just really focusing on, is this going to support me or is this going to hold me back with my if you're on a health journey, which we all usually are for our entire lives if you're on a health journey, but wherever you are in life, just really looking at what you're doing physically, emotionally, mentally, and just thinking, is this serving my body in the way that it needs to? And if it's not, then maybe don't keep it in your house, but maybe you can go out and enjoy it every once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good mindset. And I
Yeah.
really love what you said about making sure your home is your safe space, because yeah, like you're not going to be able to control what happens in other people's home or what happens when you're at a restaurant. And that doesn't mean you should just like isolate yourself and never go out, but being able to come home, because the place you spend the most of your time should be the place where you have the cleanest products and the most quality foods and the things that are going to really nourish and support you. so that when you do go out, you can enjoy a little bit, knowing like you're going to go back to what is, it's again, that 80-20 principle. If 80% of
Right.
life is, the type of lifestyle you want to be living, then 20% like enjoy it, like I think that's where your body can handle it. It's just when it gets overloaded that we really start to run into issues. So yeah, really good principle.
I love that. Well, is there anything else you want to touch on before we go? I want to do some rapid fire questions with you. So if you're ready, we'll get going for
I
it.
think I'm ready. I'm like, I feel like I've probably overshared way too much. So I'm like, if y'all are sick of me already, I'm sorry.
Girl, if I could call this the oversharing podcast, I would, because I love knowing every single detail about everybody's life. So maybe I'll rebrand to the oversharing podcast.
Tell us everything podcast.
All right, so rapid fire questions. If you could have any superpower at all, what would be your superpower?
Gosh, I feel like it does depend on the day and what my goals are, but I would say I think it'd be fun to get to be invisible. Just to be able to like better understand certain things. I don't know. I just feel like that would be kind of a cool superpower to just suddenly like not be seen and not be watched.
I love that. And I agree. I always say invisibility because I want to know everything about everyone. And so I went to spy on them.
So I've been asked that question before, and there's times I'm tempted to answer like mind reading. And then I'm like, I don't know if I can handle what everyone else's minds are thinking.
I know I couldn't. Invisibility would be good because the surface level, but
exactly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I agree. Okay. Have you taken any personality type tests like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or anything like that?
Yes, I believe both of those with Enneagram. So it's tricky because I feel like I was conflicted, but from all those who are like the Enneagram gurus, they always told me you're a 3 through and through. So I guess I'm a 3. And then with the Myers-Briggs, I'm pretty sure I was an INFJ or ENFJ. E is the extroverted one, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was ENFJ. I'm pretty sure.
Cool. We're kind of similar. I'm a 4-wing 3 for Myers. And then
I'm a 3-wing 3, sure.
Oh, 3-4, and I'm a 4-3. So we're just a little backwards.
Yeah.
That's cool. When I meet somebody who's like somewhat of a 4, and I don't do it as like my identity. I do it as a fun tool to like get to know people. But it's really cool to meet other 4s because it's like, ooh, we don't like to be like everyone else. Like, no, you're not. You're not a 4. I'm a 4. Okay, so a meal that you could eat for the rest of your life, every day.
Good question. Gosh, I would be torn between my husband makes a mean steak, like better than any steakhouse. Like steakhouses with $100 steaks, like let us down most of the time compared to his steak. So he is a like steak professional. So I would say either that or I've really been into, have you seen that feta tomato like bake? I've been doing that with cassava pasta and I'm like, this is real good. So,
oh my gosh.
Depends on the season, but that is something I feel like between those two, I could probably eat them pretty often.
We just made that and it's phenomenal with cassava and the feta and the tomatoes. Yep. Phenomenal. So steak or the feta pasta or just combined. That can be your meal.
I was going to say that has been the meal the last couple nights. So that's probably why it's top of mind. I'm like, there's probably a million other things I could say, but those are two I've been enjoying, especially in this like colder weather we've been in. I'm like, this is just like nourishing comfort food, which I will take. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. I know. I had a smoothie today and it was so cold. I'm like, I'm in South Carolina. So yeah, I'm like, why am I drinking this right now? I had to make a warm cup of tea afterwards. So I was like, this is not okay. Okay. Last one. 2 things you could take with you on a deserted island if you knew you could take 2 things with you.
Oh, that's a tough one. I'd say my husband and a boat so we could leave.
That's like the most genius answer I've heard ever.
I don't see the point of bringing a flashlight or anything. So I'm like, let's just bring a boat so we can go get some food and then go back to the island. I don't know. Or loves to fish. So at least that would be resourceful. I don't know.
That's a good one. I've watched Survivor before and like they always want the boat so they can go fishing and get food. So I'm not kidding you. Most genius answer I've ever heard. I'm like, whoa.
I'm like, this is the most basic answer ever. But
you're on like a deeper level than most people. That's awesome. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us today. I am so glad that you were able to give us such insight on everything living with intention, especially when things in your life pivot and don't necessarily go as planned, but God has a plan for us. And sometimes it doesn't go exactly how I want it to, but we can intentionally use that path to serve other people and serve ourselves in the way that we need to. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a joy to chat with you. And thanks for giving me a space to share my story. And I just hope that it's been encouraging for your community.
It has been. And I'm sure that other people will really find this insightful and enjoy every single moment. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Live Well with Josie podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to leave a comment and review, as we would greatly appreciate it. Also, please remember that nothing discussed here today is to be used as medical advice to diagnose, cure disease, prescribe, or treat illness. These conversations are simply to be used as educational resources for living a life with intention. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Live Well with Josie, and my website, www.livewellwithjosie.com. See you next time, friend, and until then, stay intentional.